So let me start by saying how excited I am about the series of videos I'm about to release. I started markmoney.com back in 2022 because I have a strong interest in finance and I really enjoy teaching. And the website provided a creative way to do both of those things. As I began to formulate a plan for the website, I was forced to create some sort of basic structure for presenting and organizing information in a way that was relatively logical to navigate and as easy to understand as possible. Now, to make a long story short, the foundational outline of the website is the Next Dollar Roadmap. The roadmap is a guide through 10 money milestones designed to take anyone from any point in their own financial journey to the commonly sought destination of financial independence by making optimal decisions with their next dollar. It's also the plan that my wife and I followed with great success since we got married back in 2006. So in this introduction video, I'm going to share at a high level each step in the plan, and I'll follow it up with more detailed videos about each milestone on the roadmap. So the first step in the roadmap is identifying your starting point. That's creating your first budget. Just like a GPS can't give you directions without a starting point, it's kind of hard to lay out a financial plan without some idea of where you're starting from. Now first, I want to acknowledge that almost no one enjoys doing a budget. And to be sure, it's a drudgery and a headache, but that doesn't mean it isn't important. This is especially true if you're just starting out financially and need some guidelines to follow as you make monetary decisions and create habits that will stick with you for years to come. The bottom line is you have to know where your money is coming from and where it is being spent in order to exert control over it. And that's exactly what a budget gives you the power to do. It's a plan, which is preferable to the alternative option of wandering around aimlessly for years before you're forced to admit that shooting from the hip isn't working. Do yourself a favor and start budgeting now if you haven't already. It will empower you to rule over your money instead of wondering why you don't have any. Now, as you set up a budget, here's some basic guidelines that I typically provide. Now, first, I'd like to address giving. If you're a giver because of a personal religious belief like a tithe, then I think you should make this the first expense on your list because your faith should supersede your financial plan. On the other hand, if your giving isn't based on any spiritual motive, then I would just move on to the next step. Without a religious motivation, this is purely a practical decision like oxygen masks on an airplane. You have to put on your own mask before you can help others. Giving is certainly one of the best things you can do with money, but you need to take care of yourself first. All right, next on the list is saving, investing, or debt reduction, depending on your financial situation. I'll elaborate more on this in just a minute, but the goal is to set aside 15 to 25% of your income for retirement. And you may wonder why I have this ahead of food and shelter, and it's not because I think an IRA is more important than your next meal. The point is to challenge the mindset that saving and investing is something we do with leftover money at the end of our budget. Saving and investing should be a priority, but again, I'll have more to say about this later. Third, your combined cost of housing and transportation should be less than 30% of your take-home pay. On average, Americans are spending half of their income on these two items alone. Now, in hunting for places to save money for investing, these two categories are the first place I look because they have the opportunity to yield the most monetary fruit. Fourth, you want to prioritize food, clothing, insurance, fuel, and necessary utilities like power and water. Netflix is not a utility. You want to do that next in your budget. I don't have a percentage you should expect to spend here, but you should pay attention to your bills and see if there are any ways you can save more by making better consumption choices about energy and water in particular. You can also find creative ways to save money on clothes, shop for cheaper groceries, reduce the premiums on your insurance. There's several ways that you could save money here. And finally, the rest of your money is for your wants. This is things like entertainment, vacations, subscription services, gym memberships, whatever. But it could also be for saving more of your income if it allows. All right, after we have our starting point of a budget, the first step or first milestone on the roadmap is the uh-oh fund. If you're watching this and you're totally broke, then this is where your next dollar journey begins. An uh-oh fund is the greater of either $1,000 or your highest insurance deductible in the form of liquid accessible cash. If you have this already, then you can skip ahead to milestone 2. If you don't, then you need an uh-oh fund to provide some cushion for you in the event you are forced to address a sudden unexpected expense. Now, some things that come to mind include a car breakdown, an air conditioner, or a furnace that needs repair. You break your arm and have a medical expense, something like that. Now, the unfortunate fact is that these things happen, but insult is added to injury if you don't have the cash to work through these emergencies because the next logical option in the absence of cash is to take on debt to pay for the expense. Now, we'll talk more about the corrosive effects of debt on your financial well-being in just a second, but you're probably already aware that you're better off in the long run not having to pay additional interest whenever possible. An uh-oh fund gives you that flexibility whenever unfortunate events happen. And once you reach the greater of $1,000 or your highest insurance deductible, then you're ready to move on to milestone 2, which is taking advantage of your employer match. Milestone 2 is to take advantage of any employer matching contributions your employer is willing to make to your retirement plan at work or your health savings account. Now, sometimes people are surprised to see that I would prioritize saving and investing over debt reduction, but the reason is basic enough. One of the most pernicious forms of debt is credit card debt. Many of us have them, and they charge very high interest rates for balances that go unpaid. Now, the worst credit card interest rate I've seen is 36% annually, which I will use to briefly illustrate why the employer match is all the way up at milestone number 2. Let's assume that your employer is willing to match your contributions to your 401k on a dollar-for-dollar basis up to 4% of your annual salary. That means the annual return on those contributions is 100% for you before you even invest the money. So if you contribute $1,000, your employer will also contribute $1,000, and you'll have $1,000 more than you would have otherwise. Well, if you use that $1,000 to pay off a 36% credit card debt instead, you'd save $30 for each and every month that you didn't carry the balance on the credit card. Now, would you rather get $1,000 of free money from your employer or save $30 a month on your credit card bill? I'd take the $1,000 too, which is why I have the employer matching contributions so high up on the list of money milestones. Now, if your employer doesn't match on a dollar-for-dollar basis, odds are their contribution is still worth more to you than paying off your debts early. This will become abundantly clear in a minute when we talk about compounding interest. Once you've maximized your employer match, you're ready to move on to milestone number 3, which is paying off toxic debt. Okay, now we're ready to move on to paying off debt. It would be difficult to overstate the devastating effects that debt can have on your financial life. As an example, I once made a video on our YouTube channel that illustrated how a person could save $1,114,000 over the course of 30 years by paying cash for car purchases instead of buying them with debt. The simple fact is that compounding interest can be your biggest ally in building wealth or your greatest enemy. When you borrow money, you allow your lender to leverage compounding interest against you, and you miss the opportunity to use compounding interest for yourself. Debt has a uniquely destructive effect. Now, personally, I recommend only borrowing money for appreciating assets that are sure to significantly improve your overall quality of life. This includes things like homes and education. Cars, TVs, appliances, and credit cards are all examples of a consumer debt that will prevent you from reaching financial independence. You need to cut those debts loose to start gaining traction toward wealth building. For maximum financial benefit, you should start by paying off the debt you have with the highest interest rate first, then work your way down to the lowest interest debts in order. And keep paying those debts off until you've eliminated everything with the exception of your mortgage and any low interest debt. Now, for mortgages and debts that have an interest rate of 6% or less, you'll probably be better off waiting to pay those off completely at milestone 8 because it's highly likely that you'll see more value from investing over the long run. And that brings us to milestone number 4, a full-sized emergency fund. Now, once you have all those pesky debts eliminated, it's time to increase the size of your uh-oh fund to a full-sized emergency fund. Now, full-sized emergency fund is meant to provide the same safety margin or cushion the uh-oh fund gave you, but on a larger or extended scale. Now, to be sure, there are larger emergencies than an uh-oh fund can handle, but a full-sized emergency fund is primarily focused on the loss of income. This could be from the complete loss of a job or due to a slow period in the business you own. Either way, you'll need a significant amount of cash to sustain you through these times. Now, as a starting point, I, like many others, recommend that you should have 3 to 6 months of your normal expenses saved. So if you're spending $6,000 a month, you'll need a minimum of $18,000 to meet this requirement. If you're in a commission-based role, you own a business, or maybe your employer is struggling financially, you'll want to save closer to 6 months or more of expenses since you're at a higher risk of losing income. Now, many people are tempted to invest their emergency fund, but you should keep the money where you can get to it within a day or two at the most, and don't expose it to timing risk by saving it in a security that fluctuates in value regularly. Now, personally, mine is in a money market fund with my investment brokerage. This fund owns stable cash equivalents like CDs and treasuries, which don't turbulently change value from day to day. You can also use high-yield savings accounts or even checking accounts if you want to, but these probably won't produce as much interest. Now, do not invest this money in stocks. It needs to be stable and available, and stocks do not qualify. And once you've got 3 to 6 months of expenses set aside in a safe place, you can move on to milestone 5. But before we do that, I want to ask a couple of quick things. First, please consider subscribing to our channel so you can get updates when I post each of the subsequent Next Dollar Roadmap videos if you haven't already done so. And second, if there's a topic you'd like me to make a video about, please leave it in the comments below. I enjoy making content that I know people actually want to listen to or hear or see, so it's a huge help anytime I can get feedback on topics of interest. All right, milestone number 5 is saving 15% to 25% of your income in tax-advantaged retirement accounts. And once you complete milestone number 4, you'll be free of expensive consumer debt and have a nice chunk of cash available for rainy days. And now you get to really focus on building wealth so you can be financially independent. To reach your goal, I recommend saving 15% to 25% of your income for retirement. If you're getting started in your 20s, 15% is probably good enough. If you're starting in your 30s, you should strive for 20%, and if you're getting started in your 40s, you should save 25% or more. In case you're wondering, this isn't just some number I grabbed out of the air. It's based on a bunch of number crunching and math that I've done about savings rates, income replacement, and compounding interest. I'll put a link to a video that kind of describes some of that above. Now, these rates should put you on track to replace 80% or more of your income before you reach age 65. If you want to retire sooner, just increase the savings rate. Of course, saving is only half the battle. You'll need to invest the money too in order to reap the benefits of compounding interest that will ultimately carry you to your goal. I recommend buying indexed ETFs or mutual funds that provide adequate diversification by giving you access to the entire market of stocks and bonds. And the further you are from retirement, the more aggressive your asset allocation can be. Now, as you save and invest, you should prioritize tax advantage retirement accounts like IRAs, 401ks, 403bs, 457s, TSPs, and even HSAs to harness tax savings for an extra earnings boost. Now, if you want to learn more about the best order to use these accounts, I've got another video which I'll link above, but we'll also cover it later in this video series. Now, after you've started saving 15 to 25% of your income, it's time to move on to milestone number 6, which is investing for flexibility. If you've reached milestone 6, you should have plenty of emergency savings, you won't have any problematic consumer debt, and you should be well on your way to a richly funded retirement. If I'm being completely honest, at this point, you've basically won the game. You just got to keep playing it for a while longer. Now, the milestones we'll cover from here on out are actually quite flexible because you have so much of your financial house in order already. With that said, these last 4 milestones are in the order that they're in because they represent the most optimal path for accumulating wealth. And since you've already cleared the toughest hurdles, why not finish by doing things as well as you possibly can? Now, most people won't reach milestone 6 until they're in their late 30s or 40s, and it's really only an option if you have extra cash that you want to save wisely. In my opinion, the best option is a taxable brokerage account because it provides access to the same index-based mutual funds and ETFs I mentioned earlier, while also allowing you to harness the tax advantage of long-term capital gains taxes. Now, long-term capital gains are earnings from investments that you own for a year or longer. If you sell an asset at a gain after owning it for less than a year, then you'll be taxed at regular income tax rates. Those are short-term gains. Now, depending on your income tax rate, you could save thousands of dollars in taxes each year by utilizing long-term gains to save and invest for large purchases, financial goals, or even providing an income bridge for early retirement. And this is also the time when you can begin to allow your lifestyle to take larger strides forward. So if there's an expensive vacation you've been wanting to take, or you need a newer car, want to pay cash, milestone 6 is where that freedom kind of first appears. As you invest these dollars, keep in mind that you should only put money in stocks that you won't need for 5 or more years. Anything shorter, and you run the risk of having to sell it at a loss. So for expenses within 5 years, I recommend high-quality bonds if yields are good, or treasuries depending on interest rates. Anything under 2 years away is best invested in a cash equivalent or money market fund. Milestone number 7 is pre-funding kids' education needs. Now that you've pretty well taken care of yourself, you may want to consider giving your kids a head start financially by paying for or subsidizing their college education. Not only can you give them an incredibly valuable asset, like a college degree, you can do so while generating a tax savings for yourself. My favorite education savings vehicle is a 529 plan. Now, where there are no federal income tax benefits for contributions to a 529, 39 states do offer some sort of tax incentive for residents who make gifts through these plans. Now, to know exactly what those tax incentives are in your state, you'll need to check your state's plan. In addition to that, all earnings in a 529 can be withdrawn completely tax-free if they're used for a qualified educational expense. Now, this is a significant savings benefit. However, any withdrawals that are not used for educational expenses will incur a 10% penalty, and income taxes, making overfunding a 529 especially punitive. Now, you can also use Roth IRAs or UTMAs, that's a Uniform Transfer to Minors Act, to save for educational expenses, but I highly recommend using the 529 first if you can. Now, like I said earlier, I'll discuss these options more in the detailed video about milestone 7. Milestone number 8 is paying off remaining debt. Now, at this point, you've basically run out of things to do with your money, so why not add being debt-free to your growing list of financial accomplishments? If you have any remaining debt at this point, now is as good a time as any to pay it off. Now, the primary reason I suggest paying off debt at this point is that I don't want you to enter retirement carrying debt. Once you retire and begin living off the assets you've accumulated, you'll have complete control over the amount of income you realize each year. Now, this also means you control how much of your money you expose to income taxes, which is a very powerful position to be in. But if you're having to withdraw money from your retirement assets to pay off debt, then you're relinquishing some amount of control over your tax situation. Do yourself a favor and be debt-free before you retire so you don't have to realize taxable income in retirement, and you can preserve those assets and shelter them better from taxes. If you're not retiring anytime soon and your remaining debts have low interest rates, then you're pretty much free to do what you want at this point, but wouldn't you rather just be done with it? Milestone number 9 is total financial independence. Now, I'd like to tell you this is the point where you don't have to care anymore. And it's true that once you don't need money from anyone, you don't have to care that much about what anyone else thinks. But I would be remiss if I didn't point out that if you have considerable wealth, then you also have a responsibility to manage it wisely. And this is where exciting things like estate planning, charitable giving, and insurance come into play. Now, we'll start with insurance since it's the least exciting. And truthfully, you should have term life insurance from the day anyone else is depending on your income to support their way of life. And for many, this is when they have children or buy a house with their spouse or their partner for the first time. Beyond all the other common types of insurance, you should pick up an umbrella policy when your net worth reaches $500,000 or more. Umbrella insurance is super cheap and it will protect the valuable portfolio of assets you've been working so hard to build. Second is estate planning. You should also have a will really at any point in your life, but especially if you get married or have kids. Otherwise, the state will get to decide how you distribute your assets if you pass away, which you don't want. Truthfully, wills and estate plans can be expensive to draft, but they're rarely as costly as dying without having one in place. The third thing you want to think about, milestone 9, is charitable giving. Now, I touched on giving a little bit in the first section about budgeting, but you're never in a better position to be generous than when you're financially independent. But just because you can give freely doesn't mean you should. There are tax-smart ways to give, like donating appreciated assets, qualified charitable distributions, donor advised funds, or even charitable remainder trusts. Now, I'll touch on all these aspects of financial independent living in more detail when I cover those topics specifically in the video about milestone number 9. Now, that was a pretty lengthy summary about the Next Dollar Roadmap. Like I said, my wife and I have been following this plan for years, 18 now in fact, and we're currently on milestone number 8, so things have been going pretty well for us. This has been a fun intro, and I hope you found it helpful. On the screen now, I'll put a link to the next video in the series about the Next Dollar Roadmap, and I'll also put a link down in the description below. As always, I'm grateful for your interest in my videos. God bless and take care.